My name is Dan Robertson, and I have a story that needs to be told. I'm not a public speaker. I'm a retired detective who wrote police reports for over 30 years. This will be like a police report, and I'm just going to read it to you. I may stumble over my own words here and there, and I might even choke up a bit from time to time, so please bear with me. On June 6 of this year, our 34-year-old daughter, Emily Dyer, suffered a massive heart attack. It happened right in her living room in the duplex farmhouse that we share on the Colby Siding Road in Woodland. I was devastated. I knew I couldn't do this alone, so I called our pastor, told her what was going on, and asked her to help me find the strength that I knew I would need. I knew that this was way out of my control and that prayers were all that I had in my toolbox to conquer this situation. I also knew that I didn't have to go it alone, so I decided to use social media and reach out for some help praying for my little girl. I figured that if more people were praying, God would be more inclined to hear those prayers. Thus, He would be more inclined to answer them. On June 6 at 3:46 p.m., I made the following post on my Facebook page. If anyone on my friends list can spare some prayers, we really could use them about now. That initial post generated 149 reactions, 238 comments, and things just snowballed from there. My little girl was being prayed for on prayer chains that crisscrossed our country. Even one had hopped across the Atlantic Ocean to Europe. Due to my past experience in law enforcement, I had the security settings on my Facebook page set fairly tight. At some point, I decided to make my posts concerning Emily public so they could be shared and viewed by more people. That also snowballed. Our little girl was being prayed for by literally hundreds, if not thousands of people all over the world. And you know what? God heard us, and more importantly, He answered us. Later, a doctor and several nurses told us in plain English that Emily should not have survived. A cardiologist told us that everyone who was involved in the chain of events that got our daughter from our home in Woodland to Mass General Hospital in Boston made the right decisions, took the right actions at the right time. The reason that Emily was alive is not just one miracle, it's lots of them. The first link in that chain of events was when her 4-year-old son Amos did as he was asked by going upstairs to wake up his dad to come help his mom. For those who are not familiar, in their front hallway just past their stairway is a door that leads to our part of the house. On our side of that unlocked door, which is only about 8 or so feet from the foot of their stairs, were some of Amos's favorite toys, a TV set, and his Gamma and Papa. God led that little boy around the corner and up those stairs rather than through that door. I truly believe that had Amos come to our part of the house instead, he could very easily have forgotten what his mission was. His father uses a CPAP machine as a very sound sleeper, but little Amos persisted and did what his mom asked him to do and woke his dad up. Emily later told me that she has sent Amos upstairs to wake his dad up before, so it was no surprise to her that he did it. I'll give her that, but this time was different. Whether he knew it at the time or not, our little 4-year-old grandson saved his mom's life. He's a true hero, and in my eyes, he's a superhero. The second correct decision was jointly made by my wife and our son-in-law. That decision was to not call the ambulance, but to have Marshall drive Emily to the hospital himself. It took them less than 6 minutes, rather than waiting an additional 10 minutes or so for the ambulance to arrive from Caribou. Emily was quickly evaluated at Cary Medical Center in Caribou, given some medication, and flown to Bangor. The doctors had done some quick tests and decided that she had a severe blockage and most likely had suffered a heart attack. In Bangor, there were more correct decisions made and proper action taken. Emily was taken directly to the cath lab upon arrival, where it was discovered that she had what is known as a SCAD, a spontaneous coronary arterial dissection on the left side of her heart. In other words, the artery providing blood to the left side of her heart blew out. She was in need of immediate surgery. Their only cardiac surgeon was in the operating room and was not going to be available for 2 more hours. Emily couldn't wait 2 hours, so they intubated her, installed a device of some kind that kept her blood in the upper part of her body, and flew her on to Portland. The doctor from Bangor called us on the phone and said that it didn't look good, and that we needed to get to Portland as quick as we safely could. We gathered up a very few items, put Amos in the car, and took him to his Mimi's house in Mapleton. Marshall would ultimately meet us in Portland. In Portland, they took her straight to surgery and immediately put her on a large external machine called an ECMO, which took the place of her heart and lungs. That machine saved her life. The doctor there told us when she first arrived, her legs were cold and blue and her torso was mottled. They didn't think she was going to survive, but due to her young age, lack of any other health problems, and the fact that she was the mother to a 4-year-old, they decided to give it a try anyway. A very short time after being connected to the ECMO, she warmed up and regained her color. We were told that had Emily gotten there in 3 or 4 hours instead of 10 or 11, they could have surgically fixed the problem and saved her heart. We were told that the left side of her heart most likely would never recover. The doctors told us that the same reasons that they decided to put her on the ECMO would make her a very good candidate for a heart transplant. We were told that because she had a very common blood type, was a very average height and weight, would also make finding a suitable donor much easier. We were told that she would be at or near the top of the list for a new heart, maybe even as soon as in 2 weeks. Emily was ultimately taken to Boston, where after a late-night Zoom conference with 14 cardiologists from all over the country, the recommendation was that she have a more semi-permanent device called an LVAD implanted as a bridge for an eventual heart transplant. LVAD stands for Left Ventricular Assist Device. Former Vice President Cheney had one for about 2 years, even while he was in office. What we thought was going to be an emergency listing for a new heart in very short order will now be a longer wait. You see, the ECMO that saved her life was actually very slowly killing her. This is where I learned a little bit about blood. When blood flows anywhere except through the veins and arteries inside your body, it clots, even in tubes with no air. The ECMO is a rather large machine, about the size of a portable dishwasher. It's on wheels beside her bed and is connected to her body with 2 long tubes. One carries oxygenated blood to her body, the other removes blood, sends it back to the machine to be reoxygenated. Because of all of this, to prevent clots, they had to give Emily massive doses of blood thinners, which caused her to bleed, which made it necessary for them to give her more blood. This is where I learned about antibodies. Whenever a foreign substance enters the body, whether it be blood, germs, or a new heart, or anything in between, antibodies are produced to fight it off. Normally this would be a good thing, just like when you catch a cold, but in Emily's case it was not. Every unit of blood they gave her increased her antibodies, and those antibodies made her very likely to reject a new heart. The increased antibodies would also make finding an appropriate donor heart very difficult. We were told that her antibodies would level off after they stopped giving her blood and she stops bleeding. This will decrease the chances of her rejecting a new heart and drastically increase the chances of quickly finding a suitable donor heart. It was quite a roller coaster ride for us, but in the end, it was another act of God. Had Emily gotten her new heart that first night, she would have very likely rejected it and died. A heart transplant is a one-shot deal. Emily was on a respirator for over 3 weeks fighting off an infection. They tested her a total of 5 times for COVID-19 because she had all the symptoms. All came back negative. They were finally able to isolate the bacteria that appeared to have been causing the infection, and they treated her aggressively for it. They also told us that the different medications she was on could also cause a fever. Here are a few other acts of God. Remember that second link when Marshall drove Emily to the hospital? Emily was doing her daily workout routine at the time. She told us that she didn't exhibit the classical signs of a heart attack. No chest pain, no left arm pain, no shortness of breath. Emily became dizzy. Then she lost a feeling in her face and arms, followed by her legs. Then she got very hot. Marshall took her blood pressure and assumed that the device was wrong. Her BP couldn't possibly have been 86/58. Where am I going with all of this? Tamara and Marshall had no idea how sick she really was. They assumed that she had just had a pinched nerve or something, but they chose to send her to the hospital sooner than later. Emily very likely has a genetic disorder that was recently diagnosed to be present in Tamara's mother's side of the family. It's called a Loewy-Dietz syndrome. Google LDS syndrome if you want to learn more about it. It's a connective tissue disorder. Tamara's oldest brother and an uncle both had fatal heart attacks at the same nature as Emily's, both at age 54. A younger cousin was more fortunate and survived after 2 open heart surgeries. Had the doctors in Portland been able to repair her ruptured artery, Emily's heart would still have the disorder, and she would be very susceptible to another incident, which would most likely be fatal. Her new heart won't have that disorder, even though the rest of her body would. Here's another time that God intervened. In Boston, just 15 minutes before being taken in the elevator to go to another room for a test, Emily pulled her breathing tube out. She managed to do this while her arms and hands were restrained and while she was under sedation. They were able to put it back in place in short order with no issues, but only because there were several doctors present and they were not in a cramped elevator. Like I already said, this whole course of events started on June 6th, and Emily is still alive. I'm totally 100% convinced that God has other plans for her. Like we were told by the doctors, she should not have survived the initial event, let alone everything else. Our niece started a GoFundMe account to help with expenses. That is taken off and is another godsend, for which we are very appreciative. People are also holding fundraisers and making deposits into our bank account on almost a daily basis. We started out in a Boston hotel where we could see the hospital about 400 yards away. We had to pay for laundry services and it had no kitchen facilities at all. All of the restaurants down there were still closed to dine in due to COVID-19, so we were limited to takeout and what we could be heated up in a small microwave that my nephew had provided for us. My sister-in-law then found us an apartment right across the street from the hospital. It was very expensive in my eyes, but it was still $18 a day cheaper than the hotel was. I'm told that the rates we were paying were very reasonable for the area, $200 a day. We had to contract in 2-week blocks. That's $3,000 at a time, plus $15 a day to park the car. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a full kitchen with a dishwasher, a washer and dryer, 3 televisions, Wi-Fi, and on top of that it was air conditioned. There was a grocery store and a CVS about 3/4 of a mile away, and a little deli and convenience store that was even closer. Our son provided us with a baby stroller to carry our groceries in, and that even gave us an edge in the crosswalks. COVID was still a big concern down there, which is why we were not staying with our son. He lives about 10 miles west of Boston, but they have 2 small children, and we just couldn't take the chance of passing anything on to our daughter or to them. Seth did take our car to his home, which saved us a great deal of money. It's not like we were using it. Tamara put it best in this post on her Facebook page. I want to share just how awesome a God we serve. Dan, Seth, Susie, and I met with a cardiologist friend of theirs last night to help us navigate some of the medical terminology. He told us that when a patient has a dissection of their left main artery, which is what Emily had, they don't normally make it even to the first hospital. They die almost instantly at home. If you are doubting that there is a God, I hope and pray that you will reconsider, because there is one, and he is very much alive and at work in our lives. Do you believe in omens or signs? I sure do. I'm a person who needs reassurance. In the early morning hours, while we were in the hotel room in Boston, I asked God for a sign that he was listening. That very second, a backup alarm sounded somewhere in the neighborhood and then stopped. I prayed, if that's you, God, please tell me that my little girl is going to be okay. That very second, the alarm sounded and stopped again. This time it was a little further away. I then prayed, I'm going to accept that as a sign. Thank you, God. And that very second, the alarm sounded and stopped a third time. This time it was quite faint, but it sounded nonetheless. That was God saying, you're welcome. I didn't hear the alarm again that night. Backup alarms will always have a different meaning for me now. Our nephew who bought us the microwave had asked me if there was anything else that I needed. I asked him for a large print Bible as I had left mine at home. I'm getting ahead of myself a little. Our nephew works at the East Point Christian Church in South Portland. We had called him and asked him to go be with Emily because we didn't want her to die alone. He met Emily at the hospital and then prayed with me when we arrived in Portland. He quoted the first few verses of Psalm 40. He said it was one of his favorites and it fit our situation quite well. It goes like this. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. I was in the process of reading my Bible at home from cover to cover. I knew that I had left off somewhere in Psalms, but really didn't remember exactly where, so I decided Psalm 40 would be as good a place as any to start. I had finished reading Psalm 68 when our son-in-law bought my own Bible down to me after one of his several trips home. I wanted my Bible because it had large print. When I opened my Bible, I found a page marker on Psalm 69. Coincidence? I don't think so. I'm taking it as another sign from God that he was listening. Again, during the very early morning hours in our apartment on June 26th, I found myself wide awake worrying about my daughter. See, she had been very anxious about needing to go back on the ventilator and have that tube stuck down her throat and having them tie her hands up again. She also didn't like the feeding tube that was in her nose. I worried because she's going to have to do it all over again when it comes time for her transplant surgery. I also worried about finances and our living arrangements. The apartment was wonderful, but it was also very expensive. I worried that Emily will have to present herself within a very few hours when the call comes in for her new heart, and we live almost 8 hours away. And then there's little Amos living without his mom. Then, out of the clear blue, I heard a very loud backup alarm. It sounded like it was right outside my bedroom window, and our apartment was on the 5th floor. Okay, God, I get it. I'll just leave it all for you to take care of, just like it says in the Bible. I rolled over and went back to sleep. Oh, and all of those things that I was worried about, they all took care of themselves within the next few days. I made a deal with God shortly after hearing the backup alarms at the hotel room. I told him that if he would see fit to give me my little girl back, I would stand up and tell this story to any group who wanted to listen. This whole situation is proof positive to me that God is real, God listens, and God answers prayers. God held up his end, and I'm holding up mine. There are just too many miracles here, too many links in that chain of events. Too many signs from God for this to have been anything other than an act of God. God is the only reason that my little girl is still alive. I'm going to close by quoting Tamara's Facebook post again. If you are doubting that there is a God, I hope and pray that you will reconsider, because there is one, and he's very much alive and at work in our lives. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Tonight. My name is Greta Martin, and I'm a producer and host of the television show America, The View from the Top, who has been on the air for 18 years. And you can find me on on YouTube, but you can also find me in Maine, too, if you get Time Warner I'm sure you could ask Chaz how that goes. I'm sure somewhere we are seen all the way up to Holton, I think. So I was interested in your plight that you had, and it's a very interesting story. So do you think you'd like to give us the beginning of what happened to you? You're a young mother, you're 34 years old, you have a 4-year-old son and a husband,
Yep.
and you were living life very well and no problems until one day something happened to you.
Yeah, so like you said, I don't have any health problems. I mean, I have a thyroid condition, but nothing life-threatening. But on June 6th, I had quite a massive heart attack. And I was exercising at the time, and I sent my 4-year-old upstairs to get my husband, who was still in bed because it was like 7 o'clock in the morning. Because my face had gone numb, like I couldn't feel my face, and then I couldn't feel my arms. So somehow I got to our couch and sent my son up to get my husband. And when they came down, they went to get my mother, and we ended up at the local emergency room. That's where things start to get a little spotty. I remember getting hooked up to an echocardiogram, and they told me that I had a heart attack. So when people think about, you know, you had a heart attack, you think, oh, that's going to hurt, and you're going to have left arm pain and all of those classic symptoms, where my symptoms that I was having mimicked a stroke more than a heart attack.
Right.
But they determined that I had a heart attack and that I was going to need to be life flighted to the next big hospital in the state, which by car is, you know, 2.5 hours away.
Yes,
So
I know.
waited for the life flight, and I guess at some point I had to have a COVID test, and I don't remember much after that besides getting pushed into the ambulance and getting pushed into the airplane. And then I remember getting pushed out of the airplane in Bangor. And I don't remember anything else until I ended up, my final destination was Mass General in Boston, Massachusetts.
And that was not in the same day, but a few days later?
It was the next day, I believe. I went from Eastern Maine Medical in Bangor. Then they implanted something in me that kept the top half of my body alive long enough to get me to Portland, Maine at Maine Medical Center, where they put me on an ECMO machine. And then I took an ambulance from Maine Medical I spent one night at Maine Med, and I took an ambulance from Maine Med to Boston, to Mass General the next day. So I was in the hospital from June 6th until July 9th.
Oh, really?
So.
Okay. So when did they give you the determination that I looked up what you told me today about Lowe's-Dietz syndrome?
Yeah, so they did some genetic testing because there wasn't any reason why I should have had a heart attack. And I had a bunch of complications while I was in the hospital. I had pneumonia. I had some infection that they couldn't figure out what it was. But they did a genetics test because we found out, a few weeks before my heart attack, that there's a distant family relative that has quite a history. Like there's 2 girls that have it, and then their children have it. So they did the genetic testing, and I didn't find out for sure that I had that condition until I think it was last Friday is when I had my genetic test. So that's been fairly new, but it does put a reason to why what happened to me. And the good part of that is now the rest of my family can get tested because there's preventative measures that can happen. So this doesn't happen to them. And it doesn't necessarily, like with Louis Dietz, you don't necessarily have the same symptoms. Like some of the things that you can have is like varicose veins, flat feet, what they call twisty veins. You could have cleft
Right.
palate. I don't have any of those. The only thing that I had was I have pale skin and I have this heart thing. So it doesn't mean that every person in my family that might test positive for Louis Dietz is gonna, have a dissected.
Is it
or,
is this condition something that is more prevalent in certain cultures? Like, well, you're French. Are you French, or what's your background?
Irish.
Irish, okay. And what else? Just Irish?
I've got it written down on a paper.
We're all mixed up. And most of us up north have a lot of different people, Indians, Irish, Scottish, whatever, because of the border and where they
That's
settled.
us.
What?
Scottish, that's us. That's my side.
Okay. Well, I'm in the Irish group with the Indians. So that's good. Well, we never know about these things, but it was interesting which doctor was smart enough to figure out doing this test on you.
Well, actually, my mother suggested it because Dr. Spooner down at Mass General had told us that if my mother had not talked about the family history, she would have never thought to test me for that because I don't have any of the other symptoms.
Exactly.
So Dr. Spooner decided, since there was a family history, to do the test, and then the geneticist that I see's name is Dr. Mark Lindsay.
So we understand now how important it is to know the genealogy and the history of your family, because most of us never think about that. At least 3 generations ago, we never talked about it. But I know that starting with my grandchildren, they came home one day and they said, we want to know about our mermaid and what kind of her people were. And it was, so with that starting, we started out a whole family thing, looking up all the way to the 16th century. And we're still not far enough because there was a fire in Canada where most of the records were where we were coming from. And as a result, we lost a lot of stuff. So we can only go back to maybe about the 18th century.
Yep.
And that's about it.
Well, and the problem with Louis Dietz is it's only been diagnosed since 2005. It's a spin-off from Marfan's syndrome.
Okay.
So thinking back about past relatives that have passed away, it kind of makes sense that, they probably had this, not just, some freak heart attack or aneurysm. They probably had this condition, but they didn't start diagnosing it until 2005.
That's interesting that they waited that long. So once you had this condition, what tempted you to say, well, I want to do this and I want to let other women know about what happened to me? What happened that transpired that made you want to go further and tell women, particularly, especially young women like you?
Right. Well, really, before I even knew that I had this genetic condition, I wanted people to know that, the symptoms aren't the same. And if you feel anything that is off or odd or just different, it's better to go to the hospital and get checked rather than say, it's just this or it's just that, because I shouldn't have made it from my house to the hospital.
Right.
I did. So, and it's all because I thought, something's up. It didn't hurt, so I didn't think that I had a heart attack. But
exactly, and most of us, we delay, we poo-poo it and say, well, it'll go away, I didn't have it before, and we don't want to bother maybe taking the time that might be important for somebody else who has something more serious than us, and then you feel silly once you get there and they say, well, you're perfectly normal. It's not something, I know the people up north, they don't want to go to doctors, they don't want to do anything that will find a problem, probably, like my mother and father never went to the hospital for anything, and when they did, they had major things going on, so that was the end of that. But people, back when I grew up, we had one doctor for 5,000 people, and he did everything. And he knew, he was diagnostic, and he knew what to do and not to do. And then, being that I had an Indian grandmother, she would go in the woods and she would get herbs and she would make stuff and give it to us. And we never went to the doctor for anything. You know, we were taking care of ourselves. So that's why when something happens to us, it's hard for us to imagine that we want to push this. But I think we live in a different generation now, and there's so much that's going on in the world. I think we need to be much more careful, and more educated too, as to what it might or could happen. You can't leave that, you know, like you can't leave it that you won't let it happen. But in your case, you're doing good so far, right?
Yep. And the other, oh, my son's talking to my father. The other barrier about people not wanting to go to the hospital is, like, I have fairly good health insurance, and the copay, if you're not admitted to go to the ER, is $500.
Oh my goodness, that's not good insurance.
I wouldn't have if I wouldn't have gotten admitted into the hospital, and you know, it was just something weird that had happened. There's a $500 bill just to check to make sure.
They make that important. That's not considered good insurance. From my background of 40 years in medicine, I was very fortunate that I always worked in the medical facility, and my insurances were always paid, but I never needed them. Never did. So when
It's just the ER copay that's high. Like, I've got a very low deductible type thing, but they want you to go to like walk-in clinics versus the emergency room, and so.
Well, there aren't that many clinics up north.
There's just one.
But my goal was to someday open up an urgent care center because of my background, so people could come and get pre-testing, which, if I was lucky enough to get some kind of a deal with the government where they would pay me for people who would come in, you know, because everybody doesn't have that kind of money in Maine to go in, because I know every time I had to go to the emergency room, it was $3,500. And I thought that was kind of stupid, but I did have something, it was worth going. But even the medicine, they wanted $800 for a certain amount of pills. So I said, that's insane. I refuse to pay that kind of money. I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to pay it. But, you know, I find myself fighting a lot, but I actually find that I have good insurance right now. I happen to have Medicare, and I also have Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Maine. And I don't have any copays, and it pays everything. 20% of what my Medicare pays, that pays it too. So I consider myself pretty lucky that I can go any state in the United States. If I need it, I can have everything done. My medicine, of course, is not on that plan, but I have it with the state of New Jersey. So that covers me pretty good for what I need. But it's a big problem for a lot of people in the United States that don't have a great medical plan. If only they could get together and try to do something to help us. Look at the trillions of dollars that they're paying right now. And if they could just take some of that and put it towards a plan for the people, that everybody would be taken care of properly. You know, I mean, I think it depends a lot on us too, as people, to be sure that we keep in touch with our representatives, senators, congressmen, make sure we vote in the right people for the jobs, because sometimes these people, they've been there so long that they forget that they have a job for their people up where they come from, where they're voted in, and we're not getting good representation. And maybe we should just make sure that they don't have these representations more than so many years and then change into some new people coming in. Maybe that would help move things along more. But a lot of it depends on us. We have to be spokespeople for our, you know, whatever's going on with our lives, and be more in touch with them. And I think maybe this is going to be a turnaround now with this election. Hopefully we don't get caught in a situation where we're going to be sorry. But you know, there's a lot of things that we need to really be taking, some interest in, and one of them would be the health issues that I don't know. I know some of the people that are in office in Maine, but I don't know why they're so stuck. I don't understand why you can make complaints and it doesn't go too far.
Right. Healthcare just in general is really expensive. I mean, my claims aren't even finished at $1.7 million. And that's not even counting what they're going to charge my insurance company for the heart transplant. That's just this from June 6th to July 9th.
Right. So right now we're trying to also, by bringing attention to you, we're trying to fund you some money to make some, so you can pay some of the bills that you're going to be faced with, because you have hopefully we're praying for long term to the finish of a new heart.
Exactly.
And so you already have a fund me going, right?
Yep. My cousin set it up when I went in the hospital.
Well, that was very smart to start something, right away, so that you could have, and that's how I found you. I donated some money for you, and I thought, well, this is never going to be enough. So we have to find a way to expose you to more people.
Well, and just having my family down there, they found an Airbnb apartment, and I think it was like something like $3,000 for a week, or maybe for 2 weeks, but I think it was for 2 weeks. So, I mean, just thinking about that, and then they had to buy food, and it's 8 hours away, so gas to get there, and we were all on family medical leave, so.
I know, and it amounts to a lot of money, trust me.
Yeah.
I know, because I just had to pay cash to have my significant other taken care of by the hour, and that was monstrous. I mean, I didn't know where I was going to get the money from one day to the other. I was praying to God, please open up the doors, try to get me a way to pay my way through this for him, And I can just imagine with you. I was thinking also, in your case, we Northern Maine probably should have some kind of airlifting service for you, people like you. I know years ago they used to have the angel flights, and I know they used to try to raise money for that. And I guess what happens is they start out with a good plan, but then it dries up, and then there's nobody. So I think that's something that should always have money in an account to take care of serious people that need to travel. Because I know some people.
I had to wait 2 hours. I went in at 7:30 or so, and the life flight didn't get there until like after 11. I had to wait for once they made the determination that I needed to be life flighted, I had to wait for the airplane to come from downstate to come get me and then fly back.
Right.
So
there's limited resources. So I don't know who's in charge. I would think maybe some kind of medical center would know where the planes are coming from or dropping them off. Wouldn't you think that's someplace that they would have a connection with,
Well, especially since the hospital in Presque Isle is part of the Maine medical system, like
right.
TAMIC, and it's Northern Light Health AR Gould now, and then Northern Light Health EMMC, and I think Maine Med is wrapped up in that, and Mercy Hospital. So I mean, it's not like it's just this little hospital in Northern Maine. It's part of a bigger group. So you think that they could at least, take an ambulance from Caribou to Presque Isle, which is like 25 minutes for someone to do a normal commute. So
right.
I think it'd be faster for an ambulance. Then you could take a helicopter or plane from there.
Exactly. Because I know that they have a landing place in Fort Kent with a helicopter, because many times we'll look up in the air and we see a helicopter is leaving, and somebody will say somebody's just left on that helicopter, because that's how they come. But but I don't know how that whole situation works. So with the helicopters coming into Fort Kent, where they come from, I don't know the name of that. But
the landing pad in Presque Isle too. So
Well, somehow there's a connection there. We just don't know about it. It's too bad we don't have more information on that. Maybe somebody watching this will tune in and give us some information as um, to get a story that is easier for other people maybe when they listen to this, and they'll have some some kind of clue. The whole reason for this is to educate the people, so to make them aware of what is out there if they ever had to do anything, and maybe somebody's watching, and you never know who's going to need this information someday.
Right. Yeah, the last hospital room I was in at Mass General, right outside the window was where their helicopter pad was. And I can't even count how many helicopters we saw land.
I
So,
believe it. We got a lot, especially at this time of the year with this COVID going on. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff going on that we're not even privy to. You know, we just get numbers as to how much of this and that going, although we know that we're in a better place today than we were a week ago even.
right.
But
Yeah, they said when I was in the hospital, there was 100 active cases. They had a special floor just for COVID-19.
this is in Boston.
Yeah,
I can't imagine.
100 people in the hospital.
Just can't imagine how all this is going on. It seems like unreal.
They tested me 5 times for it because the symptoms that I was experiencing from my pneumonia were mimicking COVID, but they never did figure out what infection I had. They just treated it with some really high dose antibiotic, but they tested me four times there and 1 time in Caribou.
Well, it's a good thing that whatever you had, it got cured on its own probably, because I'm allergic to all antibiotics. So you can't give me anything because I'll blow up like a balloon.
Yeah, I don't remember any of the COVID tests, luckily, but I did have a NG tube, so a feeding tube that goes through your nose, and I do remember that, and I don't ever want to do that again.
I understand. It's terrible. They say those respirators are horrible situations.
And I was on a ventilator for 3 weeks, so.
Oh my goodness. So you've really done your time on this whole thing, and hopefully the world knows that you're a strong person, you have courage, and you have faith that you're going to get through this. And what you're looking for is for other people to have the same faith and help you financially get through this big deal, because it's not something you can handle on your own. And, you know, like they say, it takes a community to help each other, because one person alone cannot do it. And this is why I'm praying to the Lord as he listens to us talking about this story and sees our need, that he will send us some blessings, because faith is what has gotten you this far. I know your father is very religious in thinking, is very powerful the way he thinks that the Lord has done this, but he's going to get you, got you this far, and he's going to get you to the end of it too. And so with his courage, and it's powerful for you to know that your father and mother are there fighting for your life and praying all the time.
Yep.
Because I do believe in the power of prayer. I do believe it. And I think the world could use more prayers, you know, and maybe at the time that somebody sees this show, maybe somebody will say a prayer for you. And if they can't give you some funds, send a prayer, you know, make it a prayer chain from this part of the world to the other part of the world. And maybe that's going to be what's going to get you through, because I believe you're going to make it. And I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think you couldn't, because I can see just by talking to you and talking to your father. I haven't met your mother yet, but I know that you believe you will get through this. And that's something, is a testimony to the world that prayers do work.
Yep. Yeah, I've made it this far. I don't plan on not making it farther.
No, well, you will, because you're too young, and you have a purpose to have this right now, and it's a purpose for you to be talking about this to me, and also other young women, that you feel. Don't be afraid to go out there if you think you have something wrong. You know, The money sometimes is difficult, but you know what? You can spend $500, but I mean, in the end, somewheres it'll come and it'll be paid.
Right.
That shouldn't stop anybody. I mean, they spend a lot of money on things that are probably useless sometimes, but something like this that's important,
Right.
we've got to take the chance.
You've got to feel that you're worth at least $500. So what if you
Of
go
course.
and
Yeah,
and
I know.
indifferent?
And yeah, I just wish there was some way to put in a special fund for people who like don't have the opportunity to be able to pay some of these bills. There should be a way. I don't understand. I'm not into that part of paying bills for medical bills, but there must be somebody somewheres out there that knows how to get this done. You know, especially for people who need it desperately.
Well,
You need somebody who's going to fight for you, you know, to be able to get these things.
luckily, the local hospitals, at least here in Aroostook County, Maine, up here in the middle of nowhere, they do have sliding fee scales. So I mean,
That's good.
they do work with you, and that you can do payment plans and all of that. But when you
And of
wrap
course, you're young and
$1 million, you're going to pay for the rest of your life.
well, that doesn't mean very much anymore. I mean, money is money. And the way the government is doing trillions of dollars, we can't even figure out how many numbers that is anymore. What would be this little bill, right? This was just a drop in the bucket.
Right.
Oh my goodness. If only we would have some of those politicians with us tonight so we could get into them.
So I'm going to start cardiac rehab on Monday. So
And what exactly is cardiac rehab going to do for you? What's it going to be?
it's like physical therapy, but they hook you up to a heart monitor because
Okay.
it's a little bit more intense than just your regular physical therapy. Like they have a treadmill that you'll walk on. They have stair steppers. They have a hand bike. They have a exercise bike, and it's to get your heart and your muscles built up, because what I need to do is I need to try to get as close to what I was before my heart attack. So when I go back to have my transplant, I'm stronger.
Exactly.
That's the difference. Like the rehab or the recovery from the heart transplant, from what the doctors tell me, is I might be back to work in 2 weeks after my heart transplant, because I'm not going to be sick when I go into it.
Exactly.
So
That's amazing, isn't it?
yeah, like they said that you're usually on the ventilator for no more than 3 days. And then a day or two after you get off the ventilator, they have you out of bed walking, which is good, because just like some of the research that I've done, you lose 15% of your muscle mass for every week that you're on the ventilator in the hospital. So
Right.
I'm glad that I was doing those home workouts, because if I would have had the heart attack, 3 months prior, I hadn't started any of that. So just thinking about what I would have for muscle left, because that's 45% of my muscle mass for
Exactly.
3 weeks
Exactly.
a day, or the 3-week ventilator.
Right.
But once I could, it really started turning around for me once I could eat. Once I got the feeding tube out and they made me pass a swallow test. Once I could eat, I could get out of bed. They were having me walk around the floor and all of that stuff. So everything started to get, most of my progress was in the last week to week and a half that I was there.
Now, do they give you special foods or proteins or something to build you up? Or you must have some kind of a menu that's going to help you get stronger, right?
So the trick with my diet that they gave me is that it has to be a heart healthy diet. And I have to watch my vitamin K intake. So the vitamin K is in like spinach and those dark leafy,
the greens. Yes.
tuna fish, things like that. And for like you or my father, those are foods that you want to eat as much as you can stand up. But
Right.
with me, I have to watch it because it affects your what's called your INR, and I'd
Right.
have to look up what it's international something.
Yeah, that's part of the hematology test.
Right.
INR.
So every 3 to 7 days, I have to test my INR because your blood, when you have this LVAD device that I have, your blood has to be thin enough because you don't want it to stick to the tubing that's in there and clot.
Right, to clot,
But
yeah.
it has to be thick enough so if you accidentally nick yourself, you're not going to bleed to death.
Right, exactly.
You
Yeah.
need to be able
Okay.
to have some clotting. So I'm supposed to limit, red meat, and my salt intake can only be 2,000 milligrams a day. I can only drink 60 ounces of fluid every day. And fluid counts as anything that would melt at room temperature. So if I eat ice cream or eat watermelon, I have to account for all of that stuff as well. So it's just thinking about what you're putting into your body.
Exactly. Being health hardy. Yeah, I understand. There's a lot of things that we can learn from this, how to eat healthy and to keep ourselves healthy. And exercising is good because it really keeps you in shape. Vince used to walk a couple of miles every single day, and when he had his first heart surgery, he had 6 bypasses. He was up and around in 3 days, and which was amazing because they said his muscle tone is so strong. I mean, just the fact that he was a walker.
Yep.
That's all he used to do every day. He used to walk downtown and walk back, and that's like 2-3 miles anyhow.
Yep. And it also, I learned when I got on this new diet, I learned just how much money I was wasting on, junk food. Like
I'm sure.
I work, what I do for work is I work in people's homes with children birth to 3 that have developmental delays or disabilities.
Right.
So it wasn't anything for me to eat McDonald's, 3 times a week because that's what I had time for. But
Exactly.
just money that I save and not eating out and not buying coffee, that's a whole nother problem is how much everything
Is coffee something that you shouldn't be having?
So with my LVAD, I'm allowed to have coffee, but like I said at the very beginning, I have a thyroid condition. I have hypothyroidism.
Okay.
So I wasn't supposed to be drinking coffee anyway, but caffeine's a drug. So I've tried multiple times to stop drinking coffee, and it was almost like, your body goes through the withdrawals. I was sick. I was throwing up just from not having
Really?
coffee every day. But
I never was a coffee drinker, so I just can't understand that anybody could be addicted to coffee that bad.
yeah, so when I was in the hospital, obviously I wasn't getting coffee until I was off the ventilator. And so the first day that I was allowed to order off the menu, I got coffee for breakfast, and I took a sip of it, and it just hurt my stomach. The acid in it hurt my stomach so bad. And I was like, well, I'm not supposed to have it anyway, so I guess I'm done with that.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting.
And I used to bite my nails, but 3 weeks of not biting them, and now they grow the right way.
Yeah, well, something, you need certain vitamins to make sure that it's good for your hair and your nails and your skin, I never paid much attention to that, but fortunately, I'm 82 years old right now, and I don't think I act 82.
Yeah, and I had to go. I can't take a real shower until September because of this LVAD.
Exactly.
Because once you get an infection in what they call the drive line, so the line that goes into the side of your body,
Right.
it's really hard to get that out. So I've had to go to the local salon at least twice to get my hair washed because there's no sink high enough in my house that wouldn't get me wet.
Exactly.
And she found that I had patches that had fallen out. So I had the start of what's called alopecia.
Oh my goodness.
That's linked to your immune system. So the trauma that I went through caused my hair to fall out. Luckily, I inherited my grandmother's hair, and I have enough to give to anybody.
Yeah.
And it was, you can't see it when it's up and you can't see it when it's down. It's like in the middle, and it's starting growing back. So
That's good. There's a lot of little things that nobody ever knew about, you know, and something like that. You're able to teach people a lot about the history of having a heart condition. Everybody is different, of course, but that's interesting what you're talking about, losing your hair. I also have a hypothyroid, but I don't know that I have a lot of hair, but I don't think I have as much as I used to have, but maybe it's just getting old.
and I think that the hair was from being on the like I was on the ventilator for 3 weeks and all of that trauma to my body. I mean,
Yes.
I have a eye appointment next week because even my eyesight is affected. Like
Yeah.
I've always been able to hold my phone up and look at it and be fine, but now I find myself putting it out and blinking my eyes, and because I just can't focus on anything.
You know, your body's gone through tremendous trauma, you know, and but I guess if you pay attention every day, and you have to do that,
Yep.
but who can remember to do that every day though? You know, I mean, you have a life to live. You have a child that distracts you from everything else, and you started working again, right?
Yeah, I work from home right now. I just got my letter yesterday that will allow me to go into the office, but until I get my transplant, typically we go into families' homes
No,
and
you shouldn't.
graduations and meetings. I'm going to be doing all of the meetings over Zoom because I can't take the risk of, you know, I work with children with disabilities, so I can't take the risk of a child, you know, on the autism spectrum coming over and pulling on my cord.
Oh, no,
Because
no,
if they pull
no.
that cord out, then we have a really big problem.
No, you shouldn't, not until you're 100% ready to do it, because you have to take time for yourself right now. And it's good that they're allowing you to do some of the work from home, so that way it makes
Well,
it
and
easier.
because of COVID, that's all
Yeah.
that we're allowed to do. But starting in the school year, Governor Mills has listed all of the counties in Maine as green. So we'll be going back to the offices. And I'm a manager at Child Development Services, so it's going to be, you know, easier for my team if I'm there. And I have an office that's my own, so I can shut the door and social distance. And because now, like, I was cautious before all of this happened, but now I have to be even more cautious because if I got COVID, it would be a lot different than if I got COVID back before my heart attack.
Exactly.
Reached the group that, you know, you really don't want to get COVID.
No, absolutely not. It's hard to imagine that a virus is still out there and you could probably still get it, because somebody could be carrying it and they don't even know that probably they have it. It would be a good idea if we could get everybody tested, but you know, there's so many false positives that can happen along the way, and that's not like real security. That's you know, you always have to wonder if this is going to be safe enough. And for you have to take the opportunity to keep yourself as safe as you can, and nobody should
I have to
ever doubt that.
come to the decision. My son is 4 years old. He's supposed to start preschool on the 31st of August. Do I send him? Do I risk sending him to bring something home to me?
No, I don't. I think until you get yourself, you know, with your new heart and you get yourself good, I think you could probably teach your child at home.
Right.
That would be the safer thing, because you really don't want to get exposed to the rest of the people, because sometimes people, as careful as they can be, they might let their guard up one time, and that might be the wrong time that they will do it. So you can't be safe enough. I would, myself personally, I would just make sure that you do everything you can from home and keep yourself on a good diet, do your exercise. You have plenty to keep you occupied. And I'm wondering, how do they know how many antibodies, if your antibodies are going down, because you did get some blood transfusions? And when is it going to be safe enough to know that you're ready for the new heart?
So I had a follow-up yesterday, and they resubmitted my application for transplant because the first time they submitted it, it got declined because they decided to do the LVAD instead of go straight to heart transplant because of how sick I was. But the doctor explained to me yesterday that even though my antibodies are high, that doesn't mean that I can't be on the transplant list.
Okay.
I guess that, like, say there was a heart available in Texas. If you have low antibodies, then Massachusetts could accept that heart all the way in Texas, because chances are it's going to be okay and your body's not going to reject it. But when you have high antibodies like I do, it needs to be geographically closer to Massachusetts,
Right.
because they have to be able to get the donor's blood sample, and there's a sample of my blood somewhere at Mass General Hospital, and they mix them together to see if I'm going to reject it or not.
Right.
So that lessens the pool of hearts that I can choose from. But
I know.
they still are hopeful that before the end of the year or the very beginning of next year, that I'll be all done with all of this.
That's a great thing to look forward to, isn't it?
Yes.
2021 is going to be a wonderful.
Be better.
Oh, it can't get any worse than it is now. No, I understand. I mean, I lost somebody too this year that, makes it difficult even for me to want to be able to travel. I have to go up to Maine sometime as soon as I get settled down here. But in the meantime, this is a wonderful opportunity that Zoom has come to my aid in trying to get more of my shows on the air to let the universe hear about what is needed out there. So I'm hoping when I get to Fort Kent, I'll have a chance to meet you in person, and you'll be way ahead of yourself. And maybe we could just have a little lunch or something together to go out and enjoy. What kind of drinks are you allowed to have? Juices?
I only drink juice and water right now, but that's my choice. Like, they tell me that I can drink soda if I wanted to, and I can have alcohol if I wanted to, but it's just not worth it. I mean, once you are lucky enough to live through what I've lived through, you don't want to do anything to screw it up.
No, I understand that.
Now, after the transplant, I might be okay in breaking my diet a little bit and eating Lakeview's wings. Because those
when you say Lakeview, are you talking about St. Agatha's Lakeview?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, you go to that place too?
Before COVID happened, it was almost like, it was at least once or twice a month we would go up on their wing night, because we're only like 40 minutes away.
Oh, that's it? That's right, they're in the middle.
Yeah, and they taste so good that I would have drove an hour to get them.
Oh, so. I know, it's wonderful. I remember when that place opened up, that's a long time ago. I remember a lot of things about the history of that area. Now, the Babin store that's down in St. Agatha, that's my sister-in-law, my brother-in-law, and her son, Gary, that runs it now.
Oh, okay.
And so he brings in beautiful lobsters, and so what I do is, I can't eat it because I'm anaphylactic to lobsters, but I buy it for anybody else. I'll ask him to put them aside. I pay for it, and I send it to my brother and my sister-in-law that lives in my house in Fort Kent, because they love lobster, and they can't always get there. They won't do it on their own. They won't spend the money for it, but I feel like I need to treat them because they're so good at taking care of my property, and I haven't been there in 2 years. Because I had some things that happened down here, and I couldn't get back. I had a flood in the cellar, and they had to $100,000 of damages, and I had to rebuild it. And oh my God, the last 2 years, 18, 19, and 20, I have been up to my ears in reconstructions and a lot of stuff. So I need a break.
Exactly. 2021's got to be better.
I know. Well, it's wonderful to be with all of you, and I'm so thankful that God has given us this time to be together and to enjoy the moments and to learn more about each other. And we'll continue to pray and to be strong and to believe that
Yep.
this is just a stepping stone to the next part. And God bless you all. I say my prayers for all of you, your lives and your hopes and your dreams and your heart, the heart that most of all want for you, Emily. We love you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome. Have a good evening now, okay?
Okay, you too.
Keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.